Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 8th and our final webinar in our disaster webinar series. Today's webinar is on the disaster legal hotlines with Linda Anderson Stanley. Linda is the director of the ABA Disaster Legal Services, senior manager of Equal Justice Works Programming, and adjunct professor at Stetson University College of Law. I'm Kathy Grunwald, the disaster coordinator attorney at Legal Services North Florida, and I'm here with Carlin Selders, who is a disaster programming assistant with us at Legal Services in North Florida. Before we get started, I'll just want to remind you that the webinar is being recorded. I'll send you a copy of the PowerPoint and some other material that Linda has shared with us, as well as the recording. It'll probably be the Monday after the Thanksgiving holiday. The webinar has also been certified for CLE credits by the Florida Bar. If you have a pencil, I'll give you the number now, but it'll also be with the material. The number is 2000800N. And then when the webinar is over, you're going to be asked to complete a short survey, and I hope that you'll do that. And so finally, thank you for joining the webinar. And I'm now going to turn it over to our speaker today, Linda Anderson Stanley. Thank you, Linda.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. And we did a little bit of my introduction already, so I won't go into depth there again, but I will be speaking today on behalf of the ABA YLD Disaster Legal Service Program in that capacity. But I did also want to mention that I am a previous legal aid attorney myself from the Tampa Bay area at Bay Area Legal Services, where I did also directly represent disaster survivors there as well. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what the ABA YLD Disaster Legal Services Program is, what it does, how it works, and we'll specifically go a little more into detail about how it looks on the Florida side. And I will likely refer to the program as DLS for the remainder of the program. So the Disaster Legal Service Program is a project that is operated through a memorandum between the ABA Young Lawyers Division and FEMA. This began nearly 50 years ago, and it coordinates with numerous agencies to help disaster survivors in the form of volunteer legal assistance. DLS is one of the numerous federal programs that are available to disaster survivors after that are specifically written into the Stafford Act. Since 2007, the DLS team has responded to 222 declared disasters in 45 states and 5 U.S. territories. I have been a member of the team for 4 years now, and this is my second year as the director at the program. So just, I know you probably dove into this a bit with Tracy and the FEMA appeals section, but just to understand really where FEMA, or where the DLS program fits into the grand scheme of FEMA assistance, I wanted to kind of give a brief overview of how it's triggered. So any type of assistance must obviously start with the state and comes as a request from the governor. And the governor can then request either an emergency declaration or a disaster declaration. And the difference between the two is important in terms of the DLS program. So in an emergency situation, it's any type of natural or man-made event where the state, local, and private efforts and resources are insufficient, then emergency assistance is required, and total assistance cannot exceed $5 million per declaration. The major disaster declaration is a major event with sufficient severity and magnitude that the state and local and private efforts and resources are insufficient, and federal assistance is necessary to alleviate damage, loss, hardship, or suffering. And within that is where the government can ask for individual assistance. And just for fun, I put this little photo in the bottom here. This is the first disaster assistance request in U.S. history that came from William Clark of Lewis and Clark in 1814. as the governor of Missouri territory. So it's a little small in here, but you can take a look at it in your documents that Kathy will be sending around later. So now we have a major disaster declaration. When the governor requests this assistance from the federal government, we look at a major disaster declaration can come in three main categories of assistance: hazard mitigation, public assistance, and individual assistance. The DLS program falls under the many programs that are available within the individual assistance program. So in order for the program to be triggered, they have to have a major disaster declaration, and individual assistance has to be authorized. So the main program under IA that you might be aware of, and again, I think Tracy probably really talked about this a lot during the FEMA appeals training, is the individual and households program. And DLS is just an additional program that can be implemented after a major disaster declaration authorizing IA. It's not automatically triggered once IA is declared. FEMA must then send a letter of intent to implement DLS to the DLS director. The legal authority for DLS is written directly into the Robert T. Stafford Act. And the Stafford Act sets out the system which a presidential disaster declaration or an emergency declaration can trigger financial and physical assistance through FEMA. It lays out a provision specifically for disaster legal services that says whenever the president determines that low-income individuals are unable to secure legal services adequate to meet their needs as a consequence of a major disaster, consistent with the goals of the program authorized by this chapter, the president shall assure that such programs are conducted with the advice and assistance of appropriate federal agencies and state and local bar associations. And it's this piece, this provision, where the MOU between FEMA and the ABA come into play. The major objective of DLS is to ensure survivors of major disaster declarations have access to pro bono legal assistance who otherwise are unable to secure legal services. So we work to expand the capacity of pro bono by recruiting, training, and mentoring volunteers, responding to the crisis of the day, and to be a connector for the community by eliminating duplication and creating efficiencies. The program is entirely volunteer-based and is delivered via a hotline and or on-site at a disaster recovery center or DRC, where disaster victims can connect with an attorney in person. Of course, the in-person version has taken a back seat these days due to COVID, but we are still operating a hotline.
Let me ask one question, and you may be getting to this, but I think you said that
Sure.
After there's the disaster declaration, then FEMA and individual assistance is included, that FEMA then asks for the disaster legal hotline. Are they in conversations with the ABA about that, or who's the, like, FEMA is doing that on their own?
So the governor can specifically request DLS. I'll actually show a clip later on what it looks, the form that the governor fills out when requesting a major disaster declaration, and they can just say all of IA, or they can pick and choose under those categories of IA what they would like. So if they just choose IA generally, then, you know, FEMA might make a little more determination to decide what it is, along with the administration and Department of Homeland Security, on what it is that should be made available based on the type and the amount of damage in that area. And they might determine that DLS is not needed in that area, or they might make a determination that it is needed. Typically, in a major disaster declaration, we are implemented, but there are some instances when it's not, and I'll get to that. But no, the ABA has no determination power whatsoever in that decision.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So how does the program look in practice? The bulk of our work is done even before a disaster strikes, and I'm sure you've heard that a lot throughout this program. So we work to ensure disaster plans are in place, figuring out who's going to run the state hotline, creating important partnerships before the disaster strikes. Ideally, our Florida district representative is reaching out and making introductions well before implementing our DLS plan. And they're also reviewing closeout reports from previous disasters and kind of taking into consideration lessons learned and what we can do to make things better from the last disaster. Because we're in Florida, it happens a lot. So we do have a lot of lessons learned and things to look back on and contemplate on. Our disaster plan for Florida, I did include that in your materials today, so please take a look at it. And if you see anything in there that might be out of date, any contact info that's out of date, just go ahead and reach out to our district representative for Florida, and his info is in the plan as well, Thomas Graham. You can also reach out to me as well if you are having trouble finding him. But the plan has contacts for a lot of individuals who are involved in disaster preparedness and management and recovery throughout the state, including all the legal services organizations throughout as well. So we try to make sure that contact information is up to date every year. And I believe the last time we did that was July of this year. So if it's outdated, let us know, and we'll be happy to update that for you. Or if you just have any questions about it or think that something would be helpful to be added, let us know about that too. We really would value your opinion there. So during an active disaster, we're always watching and coordinating. For the larger disasters, as we can see when they're coming, we're recruiting, we're training pro bono attorneys. We're chatting with the partners depending on where the disaster is set to hit. For example, in Irma, you know, it was a statewide effort. But for Michael, or Sally right now, we worked more closely with Legal Services of Northern Florida because that's where the disaster was aimed to go. So when we can, and we know a disaster is coming, we are already coordinating, figuring out when we're going to set up the hotline and trying to recruit partners in advance. Then we get the major disaster declaration, which is typically, like I said, followed by that letter of intent from FEMA for us to activate DLS. When FEMA requests DLS, the ABA DLS program works with the district representative who works with our local legal aid groups, law firms, bar associations, etc. At this point, we should already have a well-established disaster plan in place and already be pre-planned and coordinated and ready to go. So ideally, within 48 hours of that letter of intent, we'll have our toll-free disaster relief hotline up and running for survivors. How that looks varies from state to state and disaster to disaster, but here in Florida, the statewide DLS hotline is hosted by the Florida Bar. Once the hotline is up and running, we then work with all the local bar associations to recruit volunteer attorneys to assist with the call volumes. As many of you know, legal aid attorneys really bear the brunt of the work here after a disaster. So the idea is to work together to take some of the load off of the legal aid. There are experts in landlord-tenant, public benefits, public housing, et cetera. So we try our best to get volunteer attorneys to work on the insurance claim cases, estate planning, and FEMA appeals, and those types of things. But each disaster is different, and the legal needs, of course, vary, but it is important that we always work together. The program also serves as a connector for the local and national community by convening weekly coordination calls with the local bar associations, the legal aid providers, the Red Cross representative, emergency management, FEMA, and other key players. So the program is a direct line to FEMA. We have someone on the calls who can answer questions, and we have connections in headquarters should we need to take anything up and out of the region. And also when it's available, we can help with DRC coordination and making sure that our attorneys are allowed inside the disaster recovery centers when they're there in person. So just to take a little bit of a closer look on how it looks in Florida, the Florida Bar has done a really great job of putting together intake sheets, and I put these on here for you, just a little snip, but you'll see them in your materials as well. So what happens is the Florida Bar hosts the hotline, and individuals can call into the hotline and either will have staff answer the call, or they'll be able to leave a message and they'll receive a call back within 24 hours typically. And so this photo here on the left is the intake form that the staff person at the Florida Bar fills out and gets as much information as possible. And then once they determine what the area of assistance is and the legal problem is, they refer it out to either a pro bono attorney or to the legal services provider in that area, depending again on the type of legal problem that's involved. Once a volunteer takes on the case, this little form on the right is what the volunteer will fill out once a case has been completed. And then they send that back to the Florida Bar, where they determine if the case should be closed out or if any follow-up is needed. For example, if a case, say a landlord-tenant case went to a private attorney and they didn't really have the knowledge on how to assist the individual with an eviction, they would give whatever advice that they could and then check, yes, it needs follow-up, and then we'd probably send it to legal services in North Florida or whatever area we're working in to ask them if they could help follow up with that case. But either way, the Florida Bar has done a really good job making sure that the disaster survivor gets the full scope of the assistance needed for them.
Linda, let me ask you a question on the first form. At the
Sure.
bottom where it says, does the caller otherwise have access to legal services? What kind of information are they looking for there?
So the DLS program, and we'll talk about eligibility, they don't, they're not taking in any documents or verifying financial eligibility or anything like that. So I think it would just be a question of, have you already accessed legal services? Do you already have the means? I don't think they go into anything deeper than that. This was created by the Florida Bar and not me, but those are requirements do not require anything additional than that. Just that a blanket, yes, I would not have otherwise had the means to obtain an attorney.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so I think we're just looking for a yes or no there, to be honest. Okay, so here also is a little bit of a snip of the sample press release for Florida. And just to touch on outreach and how we get the word out to clients, typically we advertise with the local TV stations, newspapers, local churches, schools, other social services agencies, and through FEMA and Red Cross. The ABA also publishes this press release as well. Currently, numbers on the hotline, which we have implemented right now in Florida for Hurricane Sally, are low. And this is not just a Florida specific issue. There are issues across the country right now reaching clients. And a lot of this, we think is because the disaster recovery centers are not open where we would access clients in person. And just this virtual remote world that we're in, and people are worried about catching COVID, it's just a lot harder to reach clients. And I'm sure a lot of you are experiencing that as well. So a lot of trends I've been noticing is that folks are using social media a lot and kind of going back to the basics with radio stations. People maybe are listening to the radio a little more and really making sure to reach out to the local bar associations, not just for pro bono recruitment, but also for reaching their clients. And then also coordinating with the VOADs and local COADs and others involved in emergencies. The main theme of kind of what's working is taking advantage of those partners that we talked about that are already on the ground, the social services organizations, disaster relief partners, governmental entities like emergency management. As far as the DRCs not being a normal brick and mortar site, but rather some of them are drive-bys or pseudo DRCs, at a minimum is really helpful because it allows a drop-off of paperwork and a place to access technology. This can happen even if FEMA did not plan that or set it up that way, by urging our local officials to and regional FEMA admin to kind of bring that up and start that. And we did that a bit in California for the wildfires. And so while attorneys can't be present at the location at these pseudo DRCs, the DLS hotline information has been distributed from those locations. The biggest asset so far that we've seen was utilizing American Red Cross while they have boots on the ground in all the areas. And both our response in Michigan and California disasters recently, when we coordinated with the American Red Cross folks, there was a large boost for DLS activity on the hotlines. The issue there is that the time window of service for American Red Cross actually on the ground is a bit limited. So it's really crucial to make sure that we always have someone involved in our coordination calls and figure out what they're doing and how they're reaching folks even when they're not on the ground.
What did the Red Cross do? They were distributing flyers for the hotline?
Yeah. So some states will just give out this. They only will have the press release, and others have created actual flyers as well. So whenever they see individuals, they're just passing out the flyers, passing out the press release, and making sure that they know that they may have a legal issue or a legal right into contact. And we've made a really good partnership with the American Red Cross. So they're all pretty informed, at least granularly on the program, enough to make sure that disaster survivors are hearing about it. So it is really helpful for them to know when we're implemented somewhere. I also wanted to note on here that in your materials, you can access this link for the full press release if you want to take a look. And this is also the phone number for the Florida specific DLS hotline.
And one question about that phone number too. So that phone number I know is active now for Hurricane Sally. Is that the same number in Florida for whatever disaster that there is?
Yes, this is always the same number for a disaster. They don't come up with a new one every time.
Yeah, that's good.
And so, you know, that's a good segue into my next slide, Kathy, is that with COVID, while we were anticipating a potential nationwide declaration of DLS, which we'll get into in a little bit, we did partner with an organization called Ring Central, who provided us with a free DLS nationwide hotline. And this is that number. So for individuals who may start at the ABA, or for our national partners like FEMA or Red Cross who are advertising the program, there's just one central hotline that folks have to remember and can give out to individuals. And that's this number here. And so anytime we implement a hotline in an individual state, we'll switch it on to the national hotline. So when someone calls this national hotline, it operates in English and in Spanish. They can either say or press for what state or territory they're calling for. And if DLS is implemented, they will be automatically routed to that state or territory's hotline. If it's not, they'll get another prompt to check out ABA Free Legal Answers or another resource that's available in their area. I had something else I wanted to say about this, and now I'm losing my thought. Oh, okay. So I have been working with FEMA, and this is not official yet, but I have gotten confirmation from their legal counsel that we will be adding this phone number to FEMA denial letters. So right now, you know, it kind of says you can contact an attorney or reach the DLS program, but now it will specifically list this hotline number and the DLS website so that disaster survivors will have somewhere to link to go to. And obviously FEMA is not going to change their denial letters every single time we have another disaster declaration for each individual number. So that's why this hotline was really crucial and really helpful. So hopefully that will be added in very soon. Oh, I guess I had more things on this slide, but everything I already said is the only thing that I missed is that also because of COVID, even though we are not implemented for COVID at the moment, we are also allowing any state who has an existing statewide hotline specifically for COVID. We're happy to add that to our national hotline as well. We also created during the pandemic our DLS National Pro Bono portal. So for licensed attorneys, this means that the DLS portal is now kind of a one-stop shop for disaster-related pro bono opportunities instead of our ad hoc versions in the past of recruiting volunteers. So once the disaster is approved and the hotline goes up, we automatically add the disaster pro bono opportunities to this site so that anyone can search, and you can also filter by state or area of issue area. Outside of our normal DLS protocol, again, we have a new kind of COVID protocol where even though we're not enacted for COVID, we are allowing organizations to add their COVID opportunities to our hotline, to our pro bono portal. And so there are two main ways that we can do this. We can add it and send opportunities to you all, or we can give you your own free access to the program so you can manage and monitor the opportunities and the referrals and attorneys yourself as well. And this was a joint project with Paladin who helped us do this. And I did put a link down here to the national portal, so you can take a look at that when you get your materials as well. So DLS eligibility. DLS is available to anyone who has insufficient resources to secure adequate legal services. So that's where that question came from on the Florida intake. The insufficiency could have existed prior to the disaster or be a result of the disaster. So when questions of eligibility arise, we typically err on the side of inclusion rather than exclusion. And since DLS is provided for free to eligible individuals, fee-generating cases are prohibited by this program. Other than that one restriction, eligibility is significantly relaxed compared to traditional legal aid eligibility, which is set at 125% of the federal poverty guidelines, absent, some exceptions here and there. So this is why the pro bono attorney aspect of the DLS program is so important. The relaxed eligibility standard assures that those who truly cannot afford an attorney or are otherwise ineligible will also have access to representation. So since the DLS program extensively coordinates with many LSC grantees, we just make sure that we have careful planning in place to ensure that ineligible clients are not being funneled to the LSC grantees, but rather to our pro bono attorneys. So for example, after Hurricane Harvey, we had a significant number of disaster survivors in Texas who were non-citizens. So they would otherwise be ineligible for services by an LSC grantee. So an LSC grantee is also not able to make a referral of an ineligible client. So in Texas, the disaster hotline is operated by the State Bar of Texas, which then routes the calls to one of 3 LSC grantees in the state. So the YLD worked also with the Houston Volunteer Lawyers Program to kind of bypass this method and make direct referrals of non-citizens to the Volunteer Lawyers Program. in Florida, like I said, the Florida Bar hosts the hotline. And so the bar is not bound by these LSD restrictions. So they can easily make the referrals either to our legal aid partners and then also refer clients who would be ineligible for those programs to our pro bono attorneys. I also did in your materials include the regs that give a more in-depth review of eligibility for DLS program for anyone who is interested in taking a look at that. Right now, DLS is currently responding to disasters in Alabama for Hurricane Sally, Florida for Hurricane Sally, the derecho in Iowa, Delta and Laura in Louisiana, the Northern and Southern California wildfires in Oregon, Tropical Storm Isaias, and the September flooding in Puerto Rico, and then also the earthquakes in Utah. I pretty much already alluded to this, that DLS, has DLS been authorized for COVID-19? No. And it's a little, this is one of those situations where a major disaster declaration has been made in every state and territory for COVID-19, but individual assistance has not been approved. And this is where I included for you all, and it might be a little hard for you to see right now, but you can take a look when you get your materials back, that it's a little, this is what it looks like when a governor makes the request for a disaster declaration. And so you can see here kind of the boxes that they check: the individual and households program, crisis counseling, disaster unemployment assistance, disaster case management, disaster legal services, and SBA. So this, in here, they have checked for all of them. And then you can see in the little written request over here that they requested disaster legal services specifically and individual assistance. And the only thing that was granted in any of those is the crisis counseling program. And a lot of what we're hearing back from the government on that, the reasoning there is that they, said that the CARES Act was supposed to take care of a lot of that. And then also for DLS specifically, all the funds that went to LSC, they're claiming enacting DLS would be a duplication of benefits, even though the eligibility requirements are different and we work together as partners, and they've given funds to LSC and implemented DLS in the past for the same disasters. So the ABA president has written a letter to the administrator of FEMA to kind of urge them to implement for COVID, but this is a battle we've been fighting basically since March. So I don't anticipate that anything will change there, but just kind of a little background info for you on that. So every disaster is unique, which which is why the DLS program has a whatever it takes approach to responding to disasters. On the most passive end of the program, we might simply just serve as a connector or a facilitator of local programs to national stakeholders like FEMA. On the other side of the spectrum, the program may take a more active role, such as operating a remote FEMA appeals clinic. For example, in American Samoa, after Cyclone Gita, which I think was 2018, myself and two other people basically served as pro bono coordinators for the island. They had no capacity for pro bono. Most of the pro bono attorney, or the attorneys in general on the island, were affected by the storm themselves and did not have the capacity to do pro bono. And they have one LSC grantee with two attorneys on the island that were able to help. So we actually got a huge volunteer base in the state. And so myself and the two other individuals would physically take the cases from American Samoa, package them together, and then refer them out to an attorney in the states wherever they were. And we had to get approval from the magistrate in American Samoa to allow those individuals to practice law for this very specific purpose of disaster legal services. So in Florida, it's not really necessary for us to take on that big of an active role because it's such a well-oiled machine, and you all are just so already used to dealing with disasters and experts on your own that there's really not much that we do on that end of it. But we do a lot more in other places where it's necessary. And we can get a really large group of pro bono together, but as I'm sure a lot of you know, those trickle away after some time as well. So I think we started with maybe 80 individuals who were ready to take on cases and willing to volunteer, but when it came down to it, we probably really only had like 30 really good volunteers who took on about 55 cases I think we placed. We also routinely train volunteers and provide technical assistance to volunteers and national and local organizations. Before COVID, we would travel a lot and do some in-person trainings. One of us went to American Samoa to really help them set up before we started this. Same thing in Alaska after the earthquakes in 2019, I think it was. So obviously things are a little different right now, but we're doing a lot of virtual trainings as well right now. Although not every agency providing disaster legal services partners with the YLD's program, we are the only one with a formal relationship with FEMA. So this relationship allows pre-access to information regarding registration numbers and disaster recovery center data. We get advance notice of DRCs opening, their locations, when they're closing, foot traffic, things like that, registration data, and access to other state and local contacts. What else? Okay, so how you can get involved. If you are not already a legal services attorney, you can volunteer with your local legal aid before, during, and after a disaster. They really are experts on a lot and can provide you with a lot of trainings and assistance and kind of be on their list to volunteer when a disaster strikes. And remember, when you do volunteer, that a lot of times the issues that are needed for legal assistance don't come up for weeks or maybe months after the disaster. So if you sign up, be accountable and be prepared to take a case when they call on you. Volunteer with DLS when it's implemented. Take some cases from the hotline. Or if you are an expert already, be a mentor for new attorneys who are taking on the cases. We do work a lot with the YLD affiliates to try to get young lawyers to take on cases. And a lot of times, you know, it's a really good experience for young lawyers to work in an area of law that they've never done before. And so anyone who can kind of mentor one-on-one and provide some advice there is really doing a great service as well. You can also spread the word. Right now, again, here's our Florida hotline number for individuals who need assistance and to be able to get to the hotline. And then here is the DLS volunteer form. So if you fill out this form or share it with your colleagues, this will go directly to the Florida Bar, where they can then start referring cases to you that come in from the hotline. And I've also included an article in here on how to prepare yourself to assist disaster survivors. And I think now, Kathy, I'm ready for any questions.
Well, one question, is there any limit to the number of times an individual can call the hotline?
No. Ideally, once they call in, and that's kind of what the intake form and the closing form is, to help make sure that we've answered all of the client's problems. But again, something else might come up again later, and then they can call back and ask another question.
That was the follow-up to that is, if they call back, are they routed to the same attorney they talked to the first time, or to the person who's next up?
Yeah, I think that would be a call that the Florida Bar makes as they're doing the intake. So if it's a situation where it's still involving the same case, I would think that the Florida Bar would maybe follow up with that pro bono attorney and ask them first. And if not, then it would go to the next person.
Okay, and I think you said this earlier, but so when they call, are they usually going to leave a message and then get a call back? Or will they talk to somebody?
Yeah, so it depends on the staffing at the Florida Bar. I think right now, while everyone's kind of working remotely, it's more likely that they'll get the answering service. But I know for Irma, they were answering calls as they were coming in as much as they could. But they're real good about calling back within 24 hours and getting all that info over to a pro bono attorney who then is supposed to respond within 48 hours.
Okay, all right. And here's another question. Is it your preference for the local COAD to refer survivors to DLS Hotline or to the local legal services office initially? And thanks for all you do to help the communities.
Thank you so much. So I am a huge legal services advocate, as you might have gathered through my presentation. The only reason I would advocate to go through the DLS hotline is if they are within that, they live within the service area. So again, it's only for those counties that were authorized through the major disaster declaration. So for Irma, again, that was the whole state pretty much. So it could have been anywhere. But right now with Sally, we're just kind of in the panhandle area. So if they're in that area that is approved, I would suggest going through the DLS hotline first so that one, we can try to alleviate some of the cases that are going to our already overly worked legal services organizations, and two, so that we don't have to worry about anyone who might be over income or otherwise ineligible for the legal services agency. We can kind of figure that out for them.
Okay. And this is sort of in the same vein as that, but what about disaster case managers? So maybe they've met and talked with someone and that person, they're working on their file, and then they're wondering whether something that they've talked about is perhaps a legal issue. What about disaster case managers calling the hotline to just say, is that a legal issue? Should I refer my client to the disaster legal hotline or to the local legal aid? Has that happened?
It probably does. And in some states that might be more beneficial than I think here in Florida, because I think the staff folks that are answering the calls are for the Florida Bar are probably not attorneys, so they might not be able to make that call. And so they would probably just say, yeah, have them call in and we'll have an attorney figure out whether or not it's a legal issue. And other states might be able to talk directly to an attorney who could answer that. But in Florida specifically, I would say, one, if you are concerned whether or not it is a legal issue, then definitely have them reach out. To the case manager yourself, I think you could reach out to me or any of your legal services organization partners, and I'm sure any of them or myself would be happy to help you figure that out confidentially and kind of troubleshoot with you. And also, I know that the DLS program and maybe even your local legal services organizations will probably be more than happy to help put together some trainings for disaster case managers to help you decide and issue spot if something is a legal issue that needs to go to an attorney.
Okay. I don't see any more questions, Linda. So thank you very much for your presentation today. I think people know a lot more about the Disaster Legal Hotline and the services that they offer and how they can access that after our presentation. So thank you a bunch for being here. And thanks.
Great, thanks so much.
Yeah. And also thank you everyone who joined the webinar today and who have joined the webinar for the last 8 weeks. Thank you for doing that. And so we'll end it today with a happy Thanksgiving to everyone, and see you sometime in the future. Bye now.